All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Sydney Williams. Welcome to the Hiking My Feelings virtual campfire. This is campfire number 12 of 20. What is time? I feel like I've been doing this for a year. Really excited to have you here. So tonight I'm going to be reading from chapter 11, which is called Hiking My Feelings. And the mantra for today is, if this is possible, what else is possible? And I think given the times that we're living in right now, that's a really good question to ask. So I am thrilled about this campfire. I have been looking forward to this since we got the confirmation from our first guest, which is Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis. She is a psychologist, an ordained minister, a sacred artist. I'm excited to read her bio. It might take an hour because she is so accomplished, and we're just really thrilled to have her here with us. And then after we talk to Dr. Thema, we will be talking to all of the Hiking My Feelings family members that were involved in a first of some kind here. So we have Ash, who was the first person to ask a question at my first talk, at my first speaking tour back in 2018. We have Becca, who was the first person to use the hashtag other than me once I started processing my trauma in this way. Pete was the first person to ask, like, what is the process of hiking my feelings? And Laura was the first person to buy the book. So I'm really excited about the group we have for you tonight. And a couple updates here. As you know, we've been sharing some resources with regards to Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on in the world today. I've been providing updates about love and support for Leslie. That's the top link that you'll see for a GoFundMe. Leslie was a peaceful protester in La Mesa and was shot in the face point blank range with a rubber bullet a few days ago during the protests out here. And she's currently in the ICU. The last update that we heard was on the 31st. So it's been a minute, but as far as we know, she's still okay, but still in the hospital and out of the coma that she was in. So I am really looking forward to getting more updates about her. I hope she's doing well. But on this list here, on the Share Your Resources page, is a bunch of different organizations and funds that you can contribute to keep this going, to keep the pressure on the people in power, and to make sure that justice is served. So please take a moment to do so if you haven't already. This is really important and really top of mind, and we cannot let up. We have to keep going. So thank you in advance for your support and your energy around these causes. It is super, super important. And if you didn't know, for everybody that is new here, we are raising money for the Hiking My Feelings Wilderness Wellness Center. That's what this campfire is all about. We're bringing hope, inspiration, and a little bit of celebration in these uncertain times, because one thing that is for certain is that we need to make sure that we are taking good care of ourselves and that our self-care game is on point. So one of the things that we're really passionate about here at Hiking My Feelings is exactly that, is self-care. And for us, hiking is self-care, thinking is self-care, journaling is self-care, taking long baths is self-care. And this organization is raising money for the Wilderness Wellness Center. And for this particular fundraiser, 80% of the proceeds that we raise will go to that construction fund. And 10% we're setting aside for the American Diabetes Association. They are on a mission to improve the lives of people living with diabetes, whether that's type 1, type 2, or pre-diabetes. And we're also setting aside 10% of the funds that we raise for RAINN, which is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization. Just as a fair warning today, the conversations that I'll be having with Dr. Thema may be a little bit triggering. So as I've said over the course of these programs, as I say in the beginning of my book, if at any point in time when I'm reading or we're conversating or people are asking questions and you feel triggered, do us a favor, take a note and write it in your journal, write it in the margins of the book if you're following along. What are you feeling and where do you feel it in your body? And what can you remember the last time you felt this way? Because what we've found over the course of doing this work with people all around the country, online, in our Hiking My Feelings community, is that as we make these notes of the things that trigger us, where we feel it in our body, and when we felt it last time, we can start to connect the dots on our own story. So if you are a survivor of sexual assault, RAINN is a really great resource, and they have a hotline, they have a chat room that's open, and I definitely encourage you to reach out to them as a great first place for resources as a survivor of sexual assault. So tonight I will be reading chapter 11. It's called Hiking My Feelings. This is the big one, guys. This is where we find out where Hiking My Feelings comes from. It's basically like a lightning bolt that hits me in the face on top of a mountain. But if you're following along, last night we were talking about chapter 10, You Don't Need the Money. And that is where I decided that I was going to quit the startup that I had just joined. I had talked to my mentor. He told me to go write a book. Turns out I did that. So chapter 11 is called Hiking My Feelings. If you're following along in the hard copy, we're on page 139. So here we go. After 95 panic attack inducing days at the startup, I quit. No backup plan, no savings to speak of, no other jobs lined up. It was the hardest decision I ever made and the easiest decision I ever made at the same time. I had to reckon with how I oversold myself on the opportunity. I had to hold myself accountable for how I was triggered and how that impacted my ability to think clearly, perform at my best, and show up how I want to show up. I had to give myself permission to release the shame of not knowing what I didn't know. There was no way I could have known what I was walking into. I didn't know what to ask. The questions I knew to ask were answered beautifully. I had to face the what ifs. What if I stayed? What if they get a big deal and start making millions or billions of dollars? What if I miss out on that? Is it worth it? That's when it became the easiest decision. No, it wasn't worth it. No matter how much money we would or wouldn't make, it wasn't worth having panic attacks every day while we figure out how to make ends meet. It wasn't worth my blood sugar levels elevating to numbers I hadn't seen since right after my diagnosis. It wasn't worth the strain on my marriage. It wasn't worth putting myself into more debt. If I was dead, I couldn't enjoy the fruits of my labor, and I wasn't even enjoying the labor part of it. And then there was the whole find my dream and chase it bit too. I couldn't keep killing myself for something that wasn't mine. So I quit. I was still waiting to be reimbursed for the last order I funded, so I wasn't able to rip the proverbial bandage completely off, but at least I was out of there. Within a few days, my blood sugar levels settled back down. I don't know if I'm psychic, if this was a self-fulfilling prophecy, or if it was just a coincidence, but now I had 2 weeks to train for the Trans-Catalina Trail and no responsibilities to return to when I got done with that adventure. 4 days after I left the startup, Barry and I went for a hike outside of San Diego. I was trying out a pair of trail runners for the first time as opposed to hiking boots, and this was the first hike we had done in a while. The first 30 or so minutes were pretty rough. My chest was congested and I just wanted to clear it out. My legs were on fire on the initial climb out of the parking area, and though I had been walking a lot while I was at the startup, those walks were on flat level ground. As we made our way above the tree line, I saw a railing that would help us get to the summit. One of the reasons we picked this hike was the view from the top, but May gray was in full effect. May gray is the marine layer that blankets southern coastal California in May, which fades into June gloom before opening up to warmer weather in July. At the summit, it was completely blocking the views we were looking forward to. I had Barry snap a picture anyway. As I watched the squirrels beg for my almonds, I took stock of everything that had happened so far this year. The documentary, leaving the agency, joining the startup and leaving it, and now here I was, actually training for the Trans-Catalina Trail. At this point, I had lost 60 pounds since my diabetes diagnosis. Considering I had just left 2 jobs in the span of 5 months, I was shocked that I didn't feel more stressed. In fact, I wasn't stressed at all. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I could exhale after proverbially holding my breath for months. And at this moment, on this summit, I could let it all out. So I did. I thought about the last time I went through something this stressful, the last half of 2014. After Adam died, everything happened so fast. Life felt like tragedy after tragedy, and all I could do was numb to cope with it. In fact, at this time of my life, I wasn't deploying my normal coping mechanisms. In 2014, I jumped into a pint of Ben & Jerry's and I was drinking a bottle of wine to myself almost every night. So how was I coping? Since I was diagnosed with diabetes, I kicked the ice cream and wine to the curb. I realized I was hiking my feelings. And that felt a lot better than eating or drinking my feelings, but it wasn't enough. Something was missing. Later that week, Barry and I set out to complete the Mission Trails Regional Park 5-Peak Challenge in one day. This would replicate the first day on the Trans-Catalina Trail, and if we could get through this, we could definitely handle the TCT. One of the things I did before I made the decision to make more room for adventure in my life was take the Clifton Strengths Assessment. This test is a series of questions designed to help you articulate your strengths and provides a thorough reading of what those traits are and how you may have seen them show up over the course of your life. I was at a particularly low point, questioning who I am, how I show up, and why I'm here. I had been swirling in a pit of mismanaged expectations, mine and others, and projections, mine and others, and I was having a hard time remembering who the hell I was and what I was good at. So I took this assessment. The results weren't shocking, but they were everything I needed at the time so I could get back to center, find my confidence, and make some decisions. While hiking these 5 peaks, I found myself thinking about the traits and how, for all of my life, I'd been fighting to understand why I react the way I do to certain things, how I work, how I process information, how I approach relationships, all of it. Not surprisingly, the order in which we completed the 5 peaks follows my strengths in order. Peak number 1, Cowell's Mountain, empathy. People who are especially talented empaths can sense the feelings of others other people by imagining themselves in others' lives or situations. Ascending cowls, I was struggling. It felt like it was taking me way longer than usual to get warmed up. I started to worry about whether or not I was ever going to be able to make it all day, as this was the first long hike we'd attempted since I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Prior to picking hiking back up, I met with my doctor to talk about my concerns I had while preparing for the Trans Catalina Trail. Initially, I was worried about the quality of food I'd be eating on the trail since the complete overhaul of my nutrition post diagnosis. I knew I needed to consume carbs and sugar to keep going on a long backpacking trip, but I didn't fully understand what that meant as a newly diagnosed diabetic. My doctor assured me that I would be fine to eat whatever I normally pack on hikes, and if anything, I should be more mindful of my sugar levels going low since I'd be hiking all day, not too high. Making our way up Cowles, I was worried about my blood sugar plummeting after hours of activity. I was worried I didn't pack the right snacks. I started to catch my thoughts wandering toward radically unlikely scenarios and stopped to take a breath and a sip of water. I had to remind myself of how far I'd already come before even setting foot on this trail and give myself a little of the empathy that I so readily deliver for others. Sydney, you've lost nearly 60 pounds since you were diagnosed. You are in the best shape you've ever been in. The 5 miler you did last week actually felt like a piece of cake, remember? As we approached the top, I told Barry, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this if we don't eat between stops. Continuing the conversation we'd been having in my head, read, just me, freaking out about food by myself while silently marching up this mountain. He gently reminded me that there was a deli across the street, and all of this park is surrounded by civilization, so we could probably find some food after we completed Cowles and Piles. I find that the first 15 to 30 minutes of any hike is my internal negotiations with myself. At some magical moment, my negative self-talk goes away, and the bliss I find while hiking returns to me, and I'll shout, "Oh yeah, I love this!" That's usually when Barry turns around and smiles and is like, "Yep, we're just walking, and all is well." When we got to the summit, I was feeling much better, and I was excited to take pictures at the summit signs to signify my completion of this peak for the challenge. Peak number 2, Piles Peak, responsibility. People who are especially talented in the responsibility theme take psychological ownership of what they say they will do. They are committed to stable values such as honesty and loyalty. As we made our way over to Piles Peak, the crowd thinned out again, and I settled back into my head and got comfy exploring my thoughts again. I thought back to just a few minutes prior, where I was convinced that there wasn't enough food for me to eat around here, and that surely I'd die on this trail not even a few miles into it. And I giggled. My brain makes some pretty dramatic jumps sometimes. When I took this strengths assessment, it was like a gigantic light bulb going off in the responsibility section. Here's some more context on psychological ownership. This conscientiousness, this near obsession for doing things right, and your impeccable ethics combine to create your reputation, utterly dependable. When assigning new responsibilities, people will look to you first because they know it will get done. Say, for example, that you ask me to remind you to get carrots at the store. I say, "Okay, you got it," and I file that away. Then we go to the store, we go past the carrots. I'll probably even pick them up, but you walk right past them. There's a good chance that holding the carrots in my hand isn't enough to trigger the reminder, so I'll put them back down and keep shopping. Then we get back from the store and you're like, "Oh, I forgot the damn carrots." At that moment, I physically recoil and my stomach does a backflip. Not only did I tell you that I'd remind you about the carrots, but I held them in my hand and let you down. I will start to figure out the master plan to make this up to you. This is how I processed every single situation ever in my life leading up to this realization. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's problematic. I smiled to myself, remembering that I'd be okay throughout this hike and I could trust that I know how to take care of myself. When I posted about this challenge on my Facebook page, I mentioned that Barry thought we could tackle the challenge in one day, and I remember the comments where my ability to complete this hike was questioned. My pace quickened a bit, as did my breath. I felt a surge of energy of sorts, that part of my body that physically reacts to the accountability piece, and this time it was different. Now, I'd be lying if I said there still wasn't a little piece of me that wanted to prove myself to the folks who assumed I couldn't do this. But that surge of energy I caught in this instance was all for me. I wanted to prove to myself that I could, hold myself to my word. If I can get that upset about remembering the carrots, I can surely direct some of that energy towards caring about my well being. I cheered myself on. You said you wanted to do this in one day. You already bagged one peak, halfway up the second. It's not even 9 a.m. You got this. Keep walking. Go get those summit selfies. And so it was. Peak 3, Quaipe, learner. People who are especially talented in the learner theme have a great desire to learn and want to continuously improve. In particular, the process of learning, rather than the outcome, excites them. This hike was the shortest distance to the summit of the 5 peaks we were tackling, 2.4 miles. The elevation gain was also the lowest of the segments we were tackling. So, when we got there and it was straight up, no switchbacks, with all the gain at once, with no relief from the steep incline, I was taken aback. I started to feel my hip get a little tweaked, as it did on that last summit before Blackjack Campground on the Trans Catalina Trail. I was wishing I had my trekking poles from the car so I could take a little pressure off. About halfway up, I turned around, took a few deep breaths, and out of nowhere, a few tears started to well up. I was struggling with my learner's tendency towards process. In particular, the process of learning, rather than the outcome, excites them. That part didn't sit well with me and triggered memories of being told, when shit gets hard, you run, on the way out of the startup. I had been trying to prove to myself that I don't run, and that part about the process being the part I like, rather than the outcome, seemed to confirm the position. Here's where my mind wandered. When shit gets hard, you run. Can I prove that true or false? If you look at my resume, what do you see? Chaos? Organized exploration? Marketing coordinator and bartender at a swanky steakhouse, student brand manager at Chipotle, intern at Moffitt Cancer Center, account executive at a PR agency in Chicago, data analyst at a marketing agency in Austin, competitive skydiver, director of marketing in the skydiving industry at 2 different skydiving centers, ran my own skydiving events and marketing business, returned to the agency world as account director, West Central leadership team, working with global brands, and finally, co-founder and chief marketing officer of an all-natural beauty brand. When we filmed my diabetes documentary, the screening interviews helped me understand my story better. I had been on a journey for the past 7 or 8 years to figure out who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing on this planet. Professionally, most of the bullet points have marketing as the common thread, as that was the function I was serving in each of those industries. But more than that, this is a demonstration of my love of learning. Marketing is something I'm good at, a skill I possess. I worked on building that skill and explored how that skill can be used in a variety of industries. I've been told that my resume is both problematic and inspirational, so you can imagine how that might lead a girl to question what she's been doing for the last few years. The takeaway from the learner theme is that it's 100% okay for me to do things my way. My way has historically been find an activity, get really saturated in it, learn as much as I can and/or acquire a particular level of understanding, and then move on to the next thing. I truly believe that life is a series of experiences strung together to teach you how to get the most out of the human experience. If you're paying attention, damn near every experience can teach you something about yourself or the world around you. As I stood facing back toward where we parked, looking out over the park and the highways in the distance, I just absorbed all of it and let it seep into my bones. Peak 4, North Fortuna, Intellection. People who are especially talented in the Intellection theme are characterized by their intellectual activity. They are introspective and appreciate intellectual discussions. As we made our way through the grasslands to the North Fortuna Saddle Trail, Barry and I were talking about how much our lives had changed since my diagnosis. Barry said to me, "I could very well run this section. I feel like I could do that." My response, "Me too." A few minutes later, I chuckled to myself. Barry asked what was so funny. I never thought in my life that we'd contemplate running together. That's all. Once we got to the saddle trail, it was one very steep fire road that takes you up to the peaks. No shade, just a wide road with varying amounts of gravel on it. At points, it was so steep it felt like an ice pick would have been helpful to navigate the dramatic incline. There's a section of the Clifton Strengths Assessment description of the Intellection theme that really stuck with me. Chances are good that you prepare for important conversations or discussions by collecting lots of background information. It's not unusual for you to set aside at least 5 hours of quiet time each week to consider what you have discovered. As we were approaching the summit, I felt a little nudge towards understanding. When you're all talked out, go hiking. Over the past few months, I had been leaning heavily on my friends and family for support through these transitions. From being an undiagnosed diabetic at my heaviest to the lightest I'd ever been as an adult, from corporate life to startup life to this follow your heart, make some art chapter. I had been talking through a lot of things. I was spending countless hours on the phones working through my feelings, and by the time it was all over, I made the decision to make more room for adventure so I could find out what my purpose is. I was all talked out. But I know myself, and I know that just because I'm all talked out doesn't mean I'm totally healed. The hike up to North Fortuna further connected my dots between coping mechanisms and diabetes and brought hiking my feelings into focus. South Fortuna, adaptability. People who are especially talented in the adaptability theme prefer to go with the flow. They tend to be now people who take things as they come and discover the future one day at a time. The only constant in life is change. I'm a walking example of embracing that, and it's incredible to look back and see how I've been resisting it. What I thought was one of my weaknesses has actually always been a strength. I just missed the signs. For most of my adult life, I've worked in a high stress career. Public relations is a stressful industry. Marketing is stressful. And doing that in an agency environment or in the skydiving industry is stress on top of an already stressful career choice. Deciding to jump headfirst into the beauty industry in an attempt to change the conversation from the inside, while also jumping into entrepreneurship, while also jumping into raising venture capital, I was clearly not afraid of risks. So why is it then, at almost every turn in my career, I inevitably feel like this just isn't a good fit? Is it because I've really internalized this American programming of do more, be more, have more? Is it because I'm incapable of being satisfied? Am I wishy-washy? Or is it possible that I've been trying to fit into a mold I wasn't designed to fit? Just because I'm really good at marketing doesn't mean I need to be doing that exclusively, let alone for the rest of my life. Giving myself permission to sit with that reality has been a process of extending myself the same empathy I extend to others. I mean, this was certainly the case for my health. I tried everything under the sun to lose weight before my diagnosis, and I could never keep it off. Every time I set out to lose weight, I would ask my skinny friends what they were currently doing. Some of them were on a fad diet, some were combining diet pills, some worked out 3 hours a day, some just had good luck and good genetics. What would follow was the same cycle every time. Try something new, do it obsessively until I see results, be excited by results, reward myself with unhealthy food, never return to the activity that led to the results, gain all the weight back and then some. If it was possible for me to get diagnosed with diabetes, go to the classes, review all the things I've done to get healthy in the past and throw it all away, and follow my intuition to lose nearly 60 pounds, then perhaps it was possible that I had been making career choices from a place that was not aligned with what I actually want. Perhaps if I took the same refined approach to my career as I did to my health, I could finally find what I've been seeking professionally. That was heavy. And like the whole chasing dreams thing, once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. At the summit of the first training hike, I realized that instead of eating and drinking my feelings in times of stress, I had been hiking my feelings. Diabetes was to thank for that. I felt empowered, and having awareness around this shift was revolutionary for me. However, while hiking my feelings felt like an interesting container for processing emotions, I've never been one to be satisfied with just one answer. So I wanted to get to the root of this. Why was I eating and drinking my feelings in the first place? I had been doing a lot of journaling around this hiking my feelings idea and started posting my essays on my website, as well as some pictures on Instagram. Suddenly, my branding instincts kicked in. Has anyone used this hashtag? Is the URL available? How about the Instagram handles? The hashtag hadn't been used before, and the handle was available. So was the URL. I was shocked that someone else hadn't thought of this yet. I mean, of course, I wasn't the first person to find clarity on the trail, but it blew my mind that hiking my feelings wasn't already a thing out there in the universe. It felt like a calling. Boom shakalaka. That's chapter 11, hiking my feelings. So now, in the spirit of all things coping mechanisms, violence, trauma, recovery, I got the lady who literally wrote the book on most of this, Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis. Hello. Wow, I'm so excited that you're here. Come on down. It's like The Price is Right.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so glad to be with you, and thank you for sharing your reading.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I do want to read a chunk of your bio because your bio is long and wonderful, but I just want to give people an understanding of who they're dealing with here. So, Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis is a professor of psychology at Pepperdine University. She is the 2015 awardee for the California Psychological Association Distinguished Scientist Award for her research addressing trauma and oppression. She is also a past president of the for the Psychology of Women and a former American Psychological Association representative to the United Nations. She received the Early Career Distinguished Contributions to Psychology and the Public Service Award. Dr. Thema Bryant-Davis is the director of the Culture and Trauma Research Lab at Pepperdine University, which focuses on the cultural context of recovery from interpersonal traumas such as child abuse, sexual assault, intimate partner abuse, racism, and human trafficking. I'm just going to go ahead and drop the mic because I don't need it. Hey, how are you?
Oh, I am grateful to be here and grateful for the weekend, a season of some restoration and self-care.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. My first question is, if there is one thing that you've seen in your practice, in your research, all the work that you've done in the space of recovering from trauma and oppression, is there like a common theme, like one story that everybody that you've ever met tells themselves that if we could just erase that, the world would be a better place like this?
Well, a big piece related to interpersonal trauma, sexual trauma, medical trauma, and the trauma of oppression is the lie of our unworthiness. And it is the lie of shame. And when we are stuck and stagnant and heavy in a place of shame, it can create all kinds of despair, depression, anxiety, insecurity. And so a part of our healing from the wounds of oppression, the wounds of racism, the wounds of sexual violence, the wounds of medical trauma is really radically embracing our worth and our value in the midst of an environment that often tries to dehumanize us, in the midst of an environment that often seeks to silence us. And so, particularly with interpersonal trauma, which means someone did something to hurt you, as opposed to a natural disaster. But with interpersonal trauma in particular, an important part of our healing is in relationship. So what it feels like and what it means to be seen, to be known, to be heard, to be appreciated, to be loved is a very sacred act. And so relationships can be therapeutic. So our connection with family and friends, connections with a mental health professional, if these are spaces where we can be honest, if these are spaces where we are safe, if these are spaces where we can be transparent, some incredible healing can happen.
And everything you just said, the first thing I'm thinking of is my husband. So I hadn't told anybody about my assault for 11 years, not even my husband. He was the first person I told. And at that point, we had been together for 5 years, or together for 7, married for 5 years. And if there's anybody out here that's watching that wants to be able to show up for somebody in that way, do you have any tips for that? Because I know not everybody can be that person that helps you on your healing journey. We don't all have the capacity to help people heal. But if there's somebody who's like, I want to be this person and show up for people in this way, what's a great way to start doing that?
So it really is about trust. And so people are watching and listening, trying to determine, is this someone who can hold my truth? And so it really has to come from an authentic place. Right now with the uprising, we have many people who are trying to check in or connect with people, but there's not a foundation of a relationship, which is why it's important that you named your husband, right? Because you know him, he knows you. And so it wasn't a random decision to disclose to him, right? The sharing took place out of a space of trust. So I would say consistently showing up for people. Also, transparency can be contagious. So if we're acting like we're perfect, if we act like we always have it together, then people can feel unsafe to share, right? Because then they're like, oh, that's someone who has never been through a storm, right? But when we are transparent about, saying I'm exhausted, right? Or I'm tired, or I'm counting down for the weekend, or whatever that is, it gives people permission to open up and to share. And the other piece is when we ask and want a sincere answer. Because sometimes I think in society, we have like these kind of social scripts where people say, how are you? But they don't mean it. We know they don't mean it. So we say, fine, how are you? And they say, fine, and we go on. It's like a social contract, right? You're like halfway walking down the hall while they're answering. But when we really like take pause, and look at someone in the eyes and say to them, no, I mean, really, how are you doing? That moment sends a signal of like, I actually care, like I actually want to hear it. And then I would say when people do take that risk of opening up, to resist the tendency to want to fix it in 5 minutes. because, we want to like have the catchy thing to say that's going to make it all go away. And that's just not real. So the person who is hurting ends up feeling like I have to pretend I'm better to make you feel better. Right. So, people are like, you just need to shake it off. Or, what helps me is taking vitamins, or, what helps me is, and they, keeping it very light. So then you feel like, okay, thank you, I feel better. But instead, when we say holding space is I'm here for whatever, right? Like if you're irritable and that's what it is, that's what it is. And so transparency, asking for real, and then not making people feel they need to mask to make you feel better. And I often raise this within my community, us raising children and telling children to fix your face. That's like a common phrase, fix your face, because people will say like children don't have a right to have an attitude. But the messaging with that is you don't have a right to have feelings, right? You can never be sad. You can never be angry. If you don't have to worry about rent, you should look happy. And that's really problematic. So for us to think about, where did the message come from that it's not okay for me to feel certain feelings? And when I mask them, the feeling doesn't go away. It just is suppressed. And then it shows up in different ways. So really, getting to a place where we create space for whatever it is people are feeling.
I love that. And it's so powerful to be seen in that way, to have somebody like you, like somebody that can read your emotions, who has the capacity to do it, who then says, no, but really, like it is, I'm a firm believer, it is one of the best gifts of the human experience is to be seen and met exactly where you're at.
That's right.
Do you have any tips for people who may be watching where they had something happen? Because there's always like, for me, it was like, well, there was that one time and I know I didn't like it, but it wasn't in the like the media approved definition of sexual assault, which was in like in an alley with a gun to my head, stranger, super violent. Like it was an acquaintance that perpetrated the violence against my body. So for folks that are out there and they're like, ooh, I'm not sure, but I think something happened to me. What's a good first step to start processing that?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say without, it's not muddy, right? It is not fuzzy. The reality is the majority of rapes, both in this country and globally, are perpetrated by someone known to us. So that is a part of the reason why we have often been caught off guard, is because we were told to like watch out for people in the backseat of your car, or when you're walking through a parking lot, right? Like we were all told to be
Get
careful.
your keys, have them in your fist. Yeah.
Ready, right? But people didn't tell you to look out when you're actually on a date, when you actually do like them. And there is this messaging about, well, if you were friendly, if you were enjoying their company, all of these reasons to make it not so. And those things are lies. They're what we call rape myths, right? But the truth is, if you have not consented, or if you are underage, or if you were asleep, or if you were under the influence of substances, you could not give consent. And so sometimes it is really hard for us to take in that a person would violate us, especially because we didn't see them as a monster per se. And that's a part of the myth too. Like this idea that we could tell a perpetrator by looking at them, and like they would look sleazy and have on a trench coat, or, like all these ideas.
Yeah, the trench coat is like such a classic, like that's what a rapist wears. It's like, what?
Right. I was with a friend at the mall when malls were still open. And there was a guy in the food court who had, like, he was an older gentleman with the coat on. And she goes, you could just tell he's a molester. And I'm like, you think like there's a molester uniform? There are people who are molesting people who wear every outfit that there is. So for us to release the myth, and also what comes with that is the shame and self-blame about how did I not see it coming? And it's a natural thing for survivors to replay the experience in our heads and try to think of like, what I could have caught or what I should have done differently. And it's important to be aware that even as we do that natural thing of replaying it in our heads, the bottom line is the person should not have done what they did. So that is at the very base of it, so whether you were at their home, whether you were in a club, wherever, if you were in your own house, that should not have happened. So I want to just raise for survivors the importance of first just saying that to yourself, right? Acknowledging to yourself that that was a violation and they should not have done that. He or she should not have done that. And that I was deserving, everyone is deserving of respect and to have their voice heard. It's interesting because when I do workshops around sexual assault and around consent, sometimes when I talk about this issue of consent, I'll have people in the audience that will say, well, if I ask someone if they want to have sex, that will ruin the mood. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Right? If you say,
I'll give an enthusiastic yes if I'm into it. I'm like, yes, let's do that.
Right. It's like if I'm afraid that if I ask, you'll say no, that means the answer is no. That means the answer is no, right? So if I am moving forward with the hope that nothing is said, right? The answer is no. So the part is intimacy can be a very beautiful experience. And it is beautiful when the people participating actually want to participate. So we want to recognize the beauty and sacredness of it, because sometimes for survivors, there can be difficulty enjoying intimacy in the aftermath of that. And a part of that can be flashbacks or intrusive thoughts. And so some of the pointers that I give people in that area is one that may not sound surprising, but open your eyes. Sometimes as soon as we get into an intimate space, people have their eyes closed, which makes it easier for your mind to take you back to someplace else where you want to be. So you want to be in the present, right? And then it also requires communication with your partner, because there are certain movements or positions that can be particularly triggering. So for us to be able to have that conversation, to be present with each other with compassion. But I do want to say that healing is very much possible. So we will never be, and I'm a survivor myself, we will never be who we were before that moment, but we can live fulfilled lives, whole lives, joyful lives. And so I want to, it's important to name that, because many survivors will say when they look around, the only survivors they see are people who are in a very depressed and broken place. And what I have found is those of us who have worked through it in some ways often are silent about it, which is why I appreciate you giving voice, because if the only voice people hear is at the point of despair and devastation, they can believe that that is all that there is. But to know that we can reclaim our lives in incredible ways, I think requires those who are comfortable and safe to be able to voice it.
I love that. Now, as a survivor, were you interested in doing this work before the assault happened, or did the assault kind of lead you to this field?
It definitely led me to the field. I was already interested in becoming a psychologist, but my focus in particularly with trauma survivors was in part as a result of being a sexual assault survivor. And then I grew up initially or primarily in Baltimore, Maryland, which unfortunately has a lot of community violence. So that tuned me into trauma. And then I actually spent 2 years of high school in Liberia, West Africa. And I'm African American, but I went there with my family. My dad was working there. And the first year was incredible, especially as a Black girl, to be able, this is before the season of Obama. So to be able to go somewhere where everyone in a position of authority looked like me was really validating and liberating, especially as a teenager, to see a whole different model of beauty, right? And to be appreciated in that way as a teenager was critical. The unfortunate thing is that the second year that I was there, there was a civil war. And so that was another layer of getting me passionate and interested in helping people to recover in the aftermath of trauma.
Whew. Yes. Man, I love that. And the part that stuck out to me on that in particular, like the representation piece is so important from whether
Yes.
that's hearing from other survivors who have come out on the other side and have healed, or seeing people in positions of power that look like you. Like representation is so important across the board. What are some ways that folks who are survivors that have arrived at that place where they feel comfortable sharing their story with other people and want to use that story to make the world a better place? Do you have any tips for how to get started with that?
Yes. I want to name that it is important to do our internal work. And I would really say first, because activism is very empowering. And at the same time, if you listen closely to people, some people who have skipped internal healing and jumped to the activism are very much in a raw place. So it's like 18 years later, but when they speak of it, it sounds like it happened last night, like, because that's the place they're in emotionally. And so
Mm-hmm.
it is therapeutic to help others. And at the same time, it is not a substitute for doing our own internal work. So I would say I appreciate the enthusiasm and the excitement. I would just caution that we not lose ourselves in service of others. And I definitely know, what that feels like after the sexual assault I experienced when I was a student at Duke University. They had a wonderful program where you could be paid by the university to work in the community. So I worked at the Rape Crisis Center, and most of the volunteers and advocates were also survivors. So it was a beautiful community for us. And there were pieces of healing and empowerment I got from that. But there was also a necessity for me to get clarity within myself. And so I would encourage that part of it as well. And then if you're going to share your story, I would also think about what are the places and with who. It's just like when you're developing a friendship, if you're talking about one-on-one sharing, sometimes I'll give people a piece of something and see how they handle it, because some people can't walk through the valley of the shadow of death, right? Some people, want to quickly run to the hills or say like on the bright side. So when there are some valley walkers, some people who can sit with you in the shadows. And so I would just kind of get a sense of, is this someone who can hear it? And that's if you're talking about individually sharing. If you're talking about sharing more like as a public speaker or in writing, then it really just is about being so grounded in myself that I know there will be a range of responses, but I'm good with me, right? So I have been places, if you present and talk about sexual trauma, people are sitting there with all kinds of stories in their heads based on a lot of times their unhealed issues. And so they will come up to you in the aftermath and say all kinds of things. But when I'm clear within me, that's not disruptive for me. I just can hear that that's where they are and I'm at peace. So I would say, that's kind of the emotional reservoir you need, and also the supports that we were talking about earlier, where afterwards I can call a friend and say, can you believe that's what they said? Yeah.
I love that. I really appreciate the rape myths that you started to bust through earlier. Are there a handful of those that just stick out where you're like, let's just cut it out?
Yes.
Like, what would some of those be?
Yes. So I would say, no matter what your outfit was, people will say like, oh, if you dress in a sexy outfit, you're inviting bad attention. So a mini skirt does not give someone a right to sexually assault you. And people have been sexually assaulted wearing all kinds of outfits. So that is not it. That if you, some people will try to act like men in particular are like animals or machines that once you flick that button, like that's the end of it. So what they would say by that is, how dare you go to someone's house and be willing to kiss them and not want to have sex? It's like, consent to a kiss, right, is not consent to penetration. So that's a myth. And I will say, without naming the university, I used to work at a university, and I was coordinating their sexual assault program. And when I went for the interview, one of the deans actually said to me in the interview for the position, well, Thema, we just don't understand, why do the girls go to their rooms? If they don't want to have sex with them, why are they going to their rooms? And, it's like horrific. And these are the people who are going to be hearing the cases that come, or complaints that come forward. And it's like, if anyone has ever lived on a college campus, your room is your house. Like, it's not like I don't have multiple spaces. So if people are visiting, or you're visiting people, it is in your dorm room. And that is not permission for someone to penetrate you. These kinds of, the other one, when we think about not even non-penetration, we talk about sexual assault at parties, that just because I attend a party doesn't mean it's okay for people to grab my behind or grab my breasts, and for us to just dismiss that and say, oh, they're just playing around, or that's just like, the climate or culture. Like, this is a sexual assault. You do not have the right to just walk around grabbing people's bodies. So a lot of these are the myths. Yeah, another big one I do want to say, as it relates to molestation of children, is when girls have developed early and people act like or talk as if the girl made her body develop. So they'll say, like, look at her, right? Look at her, she's so fast, right? She's so fast, like, just because, she happens to be 11 years old, right? With breasts, or with, and then it's assuming that the body gives the permission or invitation, is really problematic. And the last one I will address is the myth that if you don't say something immediately, then you're lying. There are so many reasons why people keep silent. One is the shock, the embarrassment, the wish, people wish it wasn't true, like maybe it was a miscommunication, maybe so trying to, and the fear of not being believed, which when people tell immediately, they can be shut down. When they tell it a year, 5 years later, they can also be shut down. But I do want to say along these lines, when people say, oh, people just make this up for attention, let me tell you, it's not positive attention. Like, you don't get a parade, you don't get celebrated, there's no rewards that you get for saying this. So we really need to stop this lie of, like, it's just a mass number of people making up stories to get attention. The reality is there is more under-reporting than over-reporting.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for that, because those are all very big ones that I thought at points in my journey. You mentioned embodied healing.
Mhm.
Can we talk a little bit about that? Like, what is that?
Yes.
How does it help people?
Yes.
Does hiking fit into that?
Right, absolutely. So sexual assault and other forms of trauma, we touched upon oppression or racism or medical trauma. Not only does it affect us mentally and emotionally, but it also affects us physically. And so the stress is in our bodies. There's, books called The Body Remembers, or The Body Keeps the Score. And so we are holding that stress in our bodies. So there's a part of healing that can happen with talk therapy. There is a part of healing that can happen also through engaging the body of the stress that we are holding. And I will say, especially for ethnic minorities, but we see this in general with trauma survivors, something called somatic complaints. So that's a physical symptom that doesn't have a medical explanation. So if you come from a family or community where it's not okay to acknowledge mental health issues, we'll say, I'm not depressed, I have migraines, right? I'm not anxious, I'm nauseous. I don't have PTSD, I have backache. And so the truth about how I am feeling is showing up in these physical symptoms. And so a part of our healing can be what we call embodied healing. So involving my body in my healing work. So that can be with trauma-informed yoga, with dancing, with hiking, with aerobics. Let me tell you, a couple of years ago, I got into the gym. I wasn't really a gym person because I'm a dancer. But when I got into the gym a couple of years ago and I looked around, there are some people in the gym who are working out some stuff. I mean, not just working
Right.
out, like they are working out some stuff. And you can see it in the level of intensity and like where people are, that there can be a therapeutic aspect of not holding on to that anger or despair or hopelessness that people are feeling. So I would definitely encourage, along with the talking or journaling, to incorporate moving your body, because it will also save, I'll say, especially for sexual assault survivors, it can save our relationship with our bodies. Some people who are sexual assault survivors hate their bodies. And I believe a big part of the reason why I don't have a hate relationship with my body is because I dance. So my body has served me. My body has been a vehicle for me in a lot of ways. And I am connected to my body beyond what someone did to this body. So it can be a beautiful way of reconnecting.
Oh, I love that so much. And that's what hiking's been for me, because when I first started doing this, I was like, oh, I felt crazy because like I don't know if it's because like I always say this. I say I grew up in Kansas, so this is what happened. But like I don't know if it's the Midwest or just the house I was raised in, but if it didn't come out of generally speaking older white man's mouth in a white coat who was a doctor, then it's not healing. And I went and I walked across this island and I connected all these dots between the trauma from the sexual assault however many years ago and panic attacks, type 2 diabetes, weight gain, workaholism, borderline alcoholism. It felt like I had never felt so connected to myself and my body and what had happened. But I also, in the same breath, felt crazy because it wasn't a doctor saying, well, this is your diagnosis and here's a pill to fix it. Like it was just me getting back into this and not hating it. And I love what you said about how you don't hate your body because you have this relationship. And I had a very distinct shift in my embodied healing where prior to getting diagnosed with diabetes and doing this work, I felt like I tried everything under the sun. Like I worked out all the time. I tried every diet. I did all the things and I could not lose the weight and I could not get healthy. But once I started doing this, I had this moment where I was like, oh, prior to this, I thought, what does my body look like? And what does that mean for my worth as a woman in this society? To what is my body capable of and how can I nourish it in a way that empowers it to perform in the way I want it to perform? So hiking really helped me transition how I think about my body, how I feel in it. And I love that you mentioned that as part of your journey as well. Cause like every once in a while I'm like, am I making this up? Like, am I a whack job? Because like this feels so natural and so good that it almost feels like it's not possible. Have you heard that from other patients and other clients?
Yes, and what you're connecting to is something we've talked about as decolonizing psychology. So there is this like colonized view that really is kind of arrogant on the part of mental health to believe that we are the only path for healing. I mean, you know, like the field of psychology is relatively young when we think about human history. So to assume that until this was created, no one had done healing work is just ignorant, right? So, you know, along with decolonizing psychology, we talk about indigenizing psychology. So what were the indigenous ways? What were the indigenous methods that people used to heal? So connecting with nature, right? That in nature and in walking and in with fresh air to be able to process, and as you said, connect the dots is healing. And it is unfortunate that that has not been taught, acknowledged, and spoken more. It's like in the aftermath now, we have people who are writing research studies and getting $1 million grants on nature interventions, right? Like now it's documented with $1 million grant. So like, oh yes, go out in nature, it's healing, right? So we on a certain level know these things. And so finding the path that speaks to us, and you know, the evidence is in the evidence, you know, it's in the fruit. how does it feel for you? And one person's path may not be another's, right? So it's exploring and being open to what is the piece that opens you up, that allows you to lay down those burdens you're carrying. And I'm glad you named the workaholism, because I think many people recognize depression and when we can't function, but they miss out on trauma survivors who are perfectionists, trauma survivors who are busy, right? Trauma survivors who have these resumes, as you said, this super long resume. It's like, why are you doing all of that, right? My grandmother would say, go sit down somewhere. So when we become liberated to the idea that I'm worthy, I don't have to be so busy, and it's okay to be still and to take sacred pause.
Sacred pause. I love that.
Yes.
Is there anything before we move, because we have some questions in the Zoom chat, and before we start answering those, is there anything on your heart and mind with recent events, any kind of tips and tricks for people that may be being triggered by what's going on in the world? Just some ways to move through this time in a healthy way so we can keep the momentum going, because
Yes.
I've heard countless times that activism and using your voice takes literal years off your life. So how do we preserve our energy so we can continue to
Yes.
make the world a better place?
So the first thing I would say is racism fights us on multiple levels. So in order to eradicate it, it takes multiple disciplines. So think about the skill set you have, the gifts you have, and how you can contribute those to anti-racism work. So for some people, and for many people, that will be marching and carrying signs, which is good for awareness raising, and also can feel like a sense of collective community, that it's like, I'm not the only one outraged. There's a bunch of people, not just in this country, all 50 states are protesting, and all over the world. So that is refreshing and can feed you. But then if you're an artist, to create art about it. If you're a mental health professional, being an anti-racist therapist that is intentional about talking about the impact of racism on our mental health. If you're a school teacher, how do I talk very actively with children? And they had a special today, I think, on Sesame Street talking about racism. And so whatever skill set you have, for us to know there is not a hierarchy on our contributions. If you are in a place of wealth and resource to be able to donate and support people who are doing the work, you're a writer, right? So looking at what is it that I have to give, because a part of what helps to keep us hopeful is a sense of agency, because if not, it feels overwhelming. What can we do? So, I can't prescribe what each person does. You have to kind of go internally to know, what can you do, right? That is a good question. What can you do? I would also say, make sure we're being informed, because there are people who have been doing this work for a long time. And so it is great to have new enthusiasm, but you want to have information with the enthusiasm. And so studying and listening, and then pacing yourself to also have self-care. Because to be honest, this is a marathon. My parents were doing this work, their parents were doing this work. And so it's not like, oh, if I expend all my energy in the next 30 days, we'll fix it. No, we're in it for the long haul. So you want to, be by the campfire so that then you can go back out and do what you're going to do. And so balance, and then community is important, so that you can be mindful you're not in it by yourself.
I love that. All right, let's check some of these questions. If anybody wants to pop on their video and ask Dr. Thema, feel free. But let's see what we got. Okay, Michelle, go ahead. Yes, we have some enthusiastic question askers. All right, Michelle, you're up first. What do you got?
Yes, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. And my question is, how do you know when you've healed? The reason I ask you this is because just a little brief on what happened to me. I was sexually assaulted. I did what I had to do. I filed a police report. I had a rape kit done, but due to the corruption in the city, my rapist was not prosecuted. He was not charged or prosecuted. So when that happened, I just pretty much locked up all of my emotions in a little box and threw away a key and became numb to it. I did some unhealthy things along the way. to numb myself from it. But I thought because I'm numb, I'm done. That's it. I'm good to go, and that's it. There were a couple of things that happened in my life that triggered me, but it wasn't to where I was emotionally crying or my body remembered anything. I was just like, okay, movies. There's movies with sexual assault that I've seen, and I've been fine. There was this one movie almost about a year ago, Wind River, that I was watching, and that sexual assault in that movie was a lot similar to my sexual assault.
Mm.
And I got triggered and I got sick. I didn't know what was going on. My body remembered, but that had never happened to me before. So I literally got sick. I couldn't, my husband had to carry me from the living room to the bed. I couldn't walk. I was throwing up. I was dizzy. And all of that happened because of that movie scene.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, why is this happening? I thought I was okay. I put it in a box and locked it away. What's going on? But I noticed that started getting sick and all that stuff. And I was like, this is why. Now I thought I was healed because I locked it up in a box and threw away the key, but I'm obviously not.
Yeah.
I'm working on getting better and letting it out, but how will I know when I've already reached that point where, like, you know what? I'm healed. I'm over this. I'm ready to speak out and motivate more people to speak out. Like, how do I know when I've gotten to that point?
Yeah. Thank you so much for your honesty, because I want you to know you have freed a lot of people who are watching, and you unlocked the box by your first statement of saying, I was sexually assaulted, and saying that publicly. And that opens the box, because the reality is you've been carrying it. When we stuff it in and we lock it away, it's still in there and it's heavy, right? And because you've been living with the weight of it, you don't even realize we're carrying it. And you had an additional violation of the system failing you. Because a big part of what survivors want when they do seek out justice is a public acknowledgement that this was a violation and should not happen. And so you went through that process, which is very challenging, and you were not supported by the public, by the law, by the system. So that also got stuffed into the box and locked away. And so I would say today begins your journey. As long as you were carrying it, it's in some ways stuck and stagnant. But when I know I'm healed is when the box is here, right? You hinted at it at the end of your question of when I can begin to tell my story, right? That actually, the thing that we run from, right? We run from the memory. We run from speaking about it because we feel like it will be too much. And the only way I get power over this story that I fear is when I can actually start to speak it and talk through it, right? It is liberating. And so some of the weight, and let me tell you how the mind works. Later on tonight, a part of you might say, should I have said it? Or I don't know if I should have said it. That part is the lie, right? That wants to say, let's lock it back in. The truth is there is a lightening of the load that can come because secrets are heavy and secrets are cemented in by shame, right? And so I invite you and all of us to take breath. And as we breathe, we recognize we create space for truth, because the shame and the secrets and silence, they choke us, right? And so to say, I'm not going to carry the weight of this box anymore. I'm taking the box out and here it is. So I thank you for that. And I would encourage you, there are multiple paths, but I do encourage psychotherapy. For those who have hesitation about that, there are sexual trauma recovery workbooks. So one of the publishing companies that has a lot of them is New Harbinger Press, HARBINGR. to help to work through it. Because the last thing I'll just say about it is, in the moment of the trauma, as we try to make sense of something that makes no sense, our minds can come to believe some distortions, some lies. And it is not until we start to work through those things that we realize, what is the lie I've been carrying around about myself, right? Because that's what the erasure of violation does. It lies to us about our worth, our value, our bodies, the fact that we matter. And so it's beautiful that you have a community, that your spouse was there to care for you. But a part of the secret is the belief of, if people knew the fullness of all I have been through, would they still love me, choose me, respect me? And knowing what I know, can I still love, choose, and respect myself? And I believe that answer is yes. Yeah, so thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Woo. Miss Jess.
First of all, thank you so much for everything that you've said and everything that you've brought tonight. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. I'm usually louder, but I'm just in a reflective spot at the moment, so I'm a little bit quieter. Mine, I have a couple questions. I put them down in the chat so I wouldn't forget, but they're basically topics and then a personal sharing. One is normalization of trauma. Second is naming of trauma, slash it's my normal. What do you mean it's trauma? This is my family. This is my life. You never see anything outside of it. It's normal. And then someone walks up to you one day and says, no, that's trauma. That was traumatic. And the last one is the one worth the sharing. I was a victim of domestic violence with someone that I'm very close to, still very close to. It's a family member. And there was a lot of understanding about the family member's mental health status and what led them to commit the assault. But there was a lot of blaming the victim. There was a lot of, what could you have done better? What did you do? Were they on their meds? Did you make sure they had their meds? Why did you go home that day? Why didn't you call 5150 sooner? I mean, 911 sooner. It was one of the most, I've been through a lot of trauma, but this is the one that I was able to name it. Yeah. And I numbed hard after that. And I didn't realize that I was numbing because of that until I met Sydney, and she helped me name it. Yeah. So I wanted to share that, to just bring up those topics of, because they're all intertwined, right? Normalization. This is my normal, or this is normal, right? It's accepted. And then blaming the victim. If I know you've probably written entire books on this, but if you could do a synopsis, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you also for shattering silence and shame and naming the experience being within the family, because that is another layer that really keeps us locked in, because we are raised to protect the family and that you don't talk about family stuff outside. And I also appreciate you naming this issue of mental illness, that it can be hard because of the messaging from other people and from ourselves when we know that the perpetrator or offender is mentally ill, but the violation or the abuse still happened, right? And that them being mentally ill didn't make it hurt any less. So to start with the part about normalization, this was an important shift that actually happened in the psychology field, because when they first were defining post-traumatic stress disorder, in the definition, it said a rare event, right? Yeah. And we had to go back and fix it, because these are not rare, right? So, we know, like, however number of us that are watching now, that among us are multiple sexual assault survivors, multiple survivors of domestic violence, multiple survivors of child abuse, of community violence, of school violence, of bullying, medical trauma, racism, oppression, heterosexism, these things are pervasive. And so it is, as you say, the normalization of how, when I was doing my dissertation on African-American survivors, adult survivors of childhood trauma, I had to change my flyers because at first on the flyer, I had the word trauma and I literally had people say things like, well, I was shot once, does that count? Right? So this net, right, of like, what is traumatic if I was molested and everybody I know was molested, like, are we traumatized, right? So it is important that we shift. We talked about myths earlier, to name the unfortunate truth that many of these experiences are quite common. And even though they are common, and even though we are encouraged to not talk about them, does not mean we have been unaffected. And the effects show up in different ways. I'm glad both you and Michelle talked about this idea of kind of medicating the pain or trying to distract ourselves from the pain, because, you know, it is our wound crying out. And so the way we manage that wound can show up in some not so neat packages, but people are trying to make it through with what they have experienced and holding silence at the same time. So it can be, say, in some ways freeing for us to be able to connect the dots, because when we don't recognize it as a trauma, then we just think, what's wrong with me, right? I'm just weird, right? Or like, I don't know why I do that. But when it starts to make sense of like, you know, for our behavior, for our mindset, if people talk long enough, then I can understand the setup of how we landed here, right? If we don't look back, then it just looks ridiculous about like, why do I keep ending up in these situations? Or why does this keep happening? Or why can't I get out of bed? And it's like, oh, there are reasons. There are buried reasons that explain why we are where we are. And once we have some clarity about that, we can start to do that healing work. But the lack of acknowledgement, which is why when we're training therapists, we tell them, you're the thermometer in the room. So you don't have to just sit there looking blank, because people have been in families where they were being terrorized and everyone pretended it wasn't a big deal, right? So then if you come and tell a therapist, this terrible thing happened, and they just say, oh, that's interesting, right? Then I'm communicating to you, no big deal, right? So we need a thermometer. And for some people, it's not until a friend, a family member, as you said, Sydney, someone, a therapist says like, that's outrageous, right? Or that should never have happened, that you suddenly like, you know, that realization of like, yeah, that was terrible. Yeah.
Thank you. I had a lot of support from certain people, but it wasn't, those dots hadn't connected. It was sort of like, we're social drinking. Everybody's social drinking. Well, maybe they were social drinking, but I was never a social drinker prior to the trauma.
Yeah. Yes.
I wasn't social drinking.
Right. You were medicating. You were medicating. Yes. And so sometimes we condemn people for the ways they are medicating their pain without acknowledging and addressing the pain, right? And so whether that's with alcohol, sometimes it's emotional eating, whatever we're doing, sexual intimacy, that we are looking for a way out, looking for some comfort. And so needing to, as you say, connect the dots to figure out like, okay, I'm not really hungry, right? Like, what is it I'm hungry for? What is it I really want on an emotional and spiritual level?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. So thank you so much for joining us, Thema. Oh, did Vicky have a question? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you? What is something that you're working on now that you're super jazzed about? Like, what's going on in your world that we can support?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful to be with you all. My website is Dr. Thema, DrThema.com. And I will announce here that unfortunately, I'm not taking new therapy clients. I'm full, as you can imagine, especially when the pandemic hit, everyone was needing support. So in terms of individual therapy, I no longer have openings, but I started a podcast last summer, which I love, called the Homecoming Podcast, Facilitating the Journey Back Home to Yourself. And I would love for you to join us on that. It's on YouTube and iTunes and SoundCloud and Spotify. You can also find me on Twitter and on Instagram. And I would love to connect with you, to journey with you. And that is what I'm currently excited about. And I would just encourage those to use your art as well. The hiking is healing, and the expressive arts are healing, and we are worthy of care.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
It's such
you.
a pleasure to see you.
All
Yeah, have
right.
a great rest of your weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, Hiking My Feelings family first. Here we go. It's time for a family meeting. We're not taking Fido to the farm. We're not getting in trouble. Nobody needs to go look at the chore chart. We're just going to talk about some of the awesome people that are part of the community. So Becca, Pete, Ash, Laura, video's on. Let's rock and roll. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we've got someone in a field. We've got someone on the beach. This is looking good. I'm really into it. So I'm going to go around and talk about the first things that you all did, and then we'll just figure out where we go from here. So Becca was the first person to use the hashtag Hiking My Feelings after I posted a post about it. And this might sound stupid, but when you're hit with a lightning bolt of inspiration, like this is my life's purpose, and then somebody other than yourself uses that hashtag, it's like the first dose of validation. So that was like one of the biggest moments of my life. I was like, I will never forget. I was sitting on the gray couch in our house in San Diego, and I was like, Barry, there's a woman with dogs and she's hiking her feelings and I'm losing my mind. And then on top of that, I was just so overwhelmed with the excitement that I completely forgot that we've been connected for now 12, 13 years via the internet. We were like the 20 something bloggers crew back in the 2007, 8, 9 years. We go way back. So that's Becca. Really excited to have you here. Pete, wave hi Pete, was the first podcast that I was on after Hiking My Feelings. So I did a test run at Finest City Improv, and I believe Amy's here too. Amy owns the theater. She'll be our guest tomorrow, so we'll talk more about that tomorrow. But I had reached out to Amy and I was like, I need a stage to stand on and tell this story on before I go to do this at REI stores for my first speaking tour. Can I come to your theater? She said yes. And there's these two dudes in the back of the theater, and they're just kind of talking to each other, kind of looking, kind of talking to each other, kind of looking. And then gravity pulls me towards their table after we're done. And Pete was like, I have a podcast, you should be on it. I was like, let's do it. He's like, okay, it's tomorrow. And I was like, all right, great. And then he asked me, what's the process for Hiking My Feelings? And I was like, oh, baby, it's just so organic. It's just something that happened. It's a hashtag. It's not this whole thing. And he was like, I call BS. You did something on that island and you need to figure out what the process is so you can help other people. And I was like, fine, okay, here we go. And then we have Ash, and Ash, I don't see your camera, but that's cool. It looks like you have a black screen. Maybe it's just my computer. But Ash, on my first speakings tour, on my first stop, which is at the Burbank REI store, this is back in 2018. I get done talking. I just spilled my guts. I almost choked on one of the hardest parts of the story, but I didn't, and I made it. And I was like, cool, deep exhale. And then Ash raises her hand, and we had connected on Instagram before. So I didn't realize that it was her until she asked the question, and she asked me what my legacy is. And I was like, are you Ash? And she's like, yes. And I was like, cool. That's the hardest question anybody's ever asked me. Dang it. Welcome to the tour. And then she was also the first person to come to one of our group hikes. So Ash is awesome. And Laura was the first person to pre-order the book. So I was in Asheville, North Carolina, and the book was supposed to be available for pre-order on October 30th. because that was the day that I had a She Explorers podcast interview coming out. So I was like, let's make a big splash, let everybody know what's happening. And I put it up like before I left the store, because I didn't know if we'd have good internet the next day, because we were like going out to the woods or something. And so I put it up, and we're getting ready, like we drive to wherever we're parking for the night, getting ready to go to bed, and I get an email, and it's from my website, and it's like, you sold a book. And I was like, this isn't supposed to happen until tomorrow. So like I went to bed that night knowing that at least one person was going to read my book. And I was like, what else is possible? So in the spirit of the mantra, I feel like, because this mantra for this chapter is, if this is possible, what else is possible? I just want to like say hey to everybody, like, Becca, what are you doing? Who are you? What's your life about? And what does hiking and nature mean to you? And then we'll go from there. We'll just kind of like go around the circle like that, because we're at a campfire. So we're just talking about like nature and shit.
Sure. So this is Dry Pond, by the way. Yeah, so I started hiking because that was the only place I could get my dogs to exercise. And you know, I've been Becca Wick on Twitter and everywhere, but for whatever reason, I had changed my Instagram handle like that year or whatever to reflect my dogs. My dog squad is called the Boysenberries. And so back then, the first use of the hashtag or whatever, I was Boysenberries, Becca's Boysenberries. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting because you said that when I used the hashtag, you felt validated, but the first time I saw you use the hashtag, I felt validated. Because, you know, I've always been someone who, you know, has eaten my feelings, never as much of a drinking my feelings kind of a person, but yeah. And I, you know, at some point when you get depressed enough, that doesn't help. It doesn't work. It's not fulfilling. And, you know, I was on a journey of body positivity because I thought that if I could, I don't think I was aware of it at the time, but I thought that if I could learn to not hate my body, maybe I would also learn to not hate myself. And that was kind of the beginning of my self-love journey. And, you know, then my life kind of fell apart for various reasons. Well, for one reason. And I needed everything that I could get my hands on as far as help. You know, I was on antidepressants, I was in therapy, I had a life coach, for fuck's sake, like, and I was hiking my feelings. And that was kind of my approach to finding healing, was just like, oh, that could help, gimme, that could help, gimme. You know. And there was one trail in particular that I always turned to, and I'm not sure why. It was just a really healing space for me. I was telling Sydney about it before we started talking. And there's this spot about 2 miles into this, you know, beautiful trail in the forest where like it's an unassuming like rock outcropping, but like the rocks kind of make a little chair, and that has always been a really sacred space for me. And I have cried a lot of tears and journaled a lot of pages sitting in that chair. And I hadn't been back for a while, but today, in honor of this campfire, I went back to that spot and just had a really nice moment with myself and deep appreciation for how much time I spent there, you know, in a lot of pain, and what a different feeling it was to be able to go there and just, you know, thank my body for getting me there. And, you know, really deep appreciation for the road that I've been on. And I'm a different person. I don't know. Is that what you wanted, Sid?
I love it. Hey, we're just telling stories, man. I love it. Yes, that's exactly what I wanted, because it's exactly what came out of your mouth.
So yeah, hiking my feelings, seeing that hashtag for the first time was incredibly validating, and I love validation. I don't need it, but I like it.
Same, big fan. Love it. Ash, why did you show up to that talk? Like, what about hiking my feelings at REI made you show up? And then why did you ask me such a hard question? Couldn't you have like thrown me a softball?
You know me, Sydney. I'm just not that kind of person. You know, when after so let me just rewind, because our chat with Dr. Thema really made me kind of do a little deep dive into my heart about why I chose to get into hiking. And I think it's, of course, it's hiking facilitates a healing process, but it also helped me understand that healing just doesn't stop with one single revelation. When I was 15 years old, I was hospitalized for attempted suicide. And when I got out, I went through mandatory counseling. I had a breakthrough one day with my counselor, and it was really great. It was awesome. I thought I'd made a lot of progress. And then the next day when I called her to schedule my next appointment, she sounded so confused. She was like, I think we're done here. And I was like, well, what do you mean? We've only had 3 sessions and I thought we were doing pretty good. And she's like, well, you had a really, really good breakthrough. So I think that you're ready to kind of go off on your own. And that was a really bad therapist. And
Yes. I haven't ever had one, but that sounds like pretty terrible.
yeah, it wasn't a super great experience. And I moved forward thinking that that's how all therapists were going to be, that once you kind of had a singular breakthrough, that's kind of when they would just dump you and basically throw you to the wolves and let you figure it out on your own. And it's not like that. You know, you don't have just one singular breakthrough and it's all better now. You know, you can move forward with your life, and it's you have some kind of revelation, and hiking facilitates that continuous healing process. You know, when you're really invested into hiking, you don't just do one hike and then you're like, well, that was great. What should I move on to next? Competitive checkers? I don't know. Like you keep doing it. You move on to bigger mountains. Maybe you do some through hiking. Maybe you move on to climbing. But it's all ingrained into that healing process. And maybe that's what I really identified with hiking my feelings. That's what drew me to coming to that first talk. And you know, early 20s, everybody I think goes through some kind of quarter life crisis of what do I want to do with the rest of my life, but also what kind of legacy do I want to leave? What kind of footprint what kind of impression do I want to leave, you know, on the people around me and in you know, on society and the world. So it's a question that I ask myself almost daily, but it's a question that sometimes I hold other people's feet to the fire on. And yours
like
too.
that. That's awesome. Pete, what's your story? Why did you see me so clearly and ask me what the process is? Like, what was your whole like takeaway from the talk, and like what attracted you to continue doing the work in that way?
It comes down to one word, and that's permission, which I didn't know at the time that was the word. I actually recently did a reflection on a Facebook post about something. I don't remember, I'm escaping now. But the thing was that like I grew up in Kentucky, and Kentucky externally was not giving me permission to be me. I had to be some version of masculine and Southern and a man and like all these things that weren't, that I wasn't finding within myself. And so the most powerful thing that my relationship with you has given me, that you model daily, is the permission to break away from, actually, Dr. Thema used the word that I'd never, decolonizing psychology, decolonizing that aspect that if I'm seeing it modeled this way in the world, in my life, whatever I was born into, the community I was born into, like that's the way it has to go. And you sold some shit, you moved into a really tiny house, you had like one idea of where you wanted to end up at Red Rocks, and then everything else kind of like didn't just fall into place, but like you gave yourself permission to explore the unknown. And you and I have had some conversations about what it's like to be in the wilderness and to be completely lost and completely afraid that there's no external validation when you're in the wilderness. It's an internal process. So you've been 5 to 10 steps ahead of me and modeling to me what it looks like to give myself permission to step into myself and to be fully me, and to be and to be okay with the people who walk beside me during this permission giving, and to be okay with the people who fall apart because they're no longer getting me to get permission from them to show up in a way that makes them comfortable. So I didn't have words for that when I met you, and I probably wouldn't have had words for that 6 months ago, but just reflections, and it's such a powerful word that I still look at, and I'm like, even like there's this level of permission too, like when we realize that the cords that we've been corded into, these beliefs and these people, are detached, and we're still sitting here waiting. It's like having a dog and you take the leash off, the dog's like, but I have to stand next to you because that's how I've been trained. So and like Ash or Becca, one of you, is talking about like it's a process, an everyday process that's not just this, oh, you had a breakthrough and now you're fixed. And then the second part of my attraction to you is, listening to Jess and Michelle and Dr. Thema interact with you, and how you give people permission to go into places with themselves. You give people that has been unsafe before, how you give people permission to share their power with others, as you did with today's guest speaker. Like it's so profound for me, because I have traditionally grown up as a sideline watcher to life. And this community is giving me permission to participate. And a lot of it is stumbling. A lot of it is not impeccable. A lot of it is not, a lot of it is clumsy AF. And being able to be graceful and clumsy at the same time it's such a gift, and it's such a hard thing to do. And you help me model that, and I help you model that, and the way we show up and talk about our stories is helping everyone model that. So like I told you before, I was like, I'm in. I may not be addicted to hiking in the same way you are. I find other doorways that get me into my feelings and things like that. But whatever that looks like, when I'm walking beside the people in this community, I feel more powerful with myself, and that's why I keep coming back. That's why I love with you and everyone that's here today.
Yeah. That is a good share. Miss Laura, you showed up in Colorado. You were at the Westminster talk, right?
Yes.
Yes. And if I'm remembering correctly, you and Victoria Miko were both there, and we were all crying at one point. It was fine. What drew you to the talk initially, and then what brought you to purchase the book? Like, I know why I would want people to buy it, but I would love to hear like why you did.
I'm going to go kind of far back in my life history. When I was 32, my dad had a quadruple bypass on his heart. And 3 weeks later, my mom had a meningioma brain tumor removed. And so I started at the age of 32 taking care of my parents. As time progressed, my parents were diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer on my dad, and my mom 3 months later was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So I was continuing to take care of my mom and dad. During that whole process, my dad passed away in 2011. My mom passed away in 2017. And during that entire process of taking care of them from the time that I was 32, I am now technically 58, soon to be 59. I did not know who I was. And when my mom passed away in 2017, I am the one that had to handle her estate for me and my brother, and dealing with all of that with lawyers and all of that. I still did not have a time to grieve. I didn't have a time to find out who I was. In 2019, in January, I lost my job because of everything that I had been going through. And I had started finding out that I had some medical issues of my own during that process. When I saw you, Linda, when she had talked about giving somebody a big hug and no words. And when I went and saw you and heard you talk, that was how we actually met. Was at the end, pretty much everybody had left. There was me, might have been Victoria that was there with us. I know Barry was sitting behind me through the whole entire thing. We hugged, we cried, and that let me finally open up my heart. And I started following you, the Hiking My Feelings group on Facebook, and I just started finding answers. And then in June was when I was diagnosed with my own meningioma, brain tumor, on the 15th of June. I was in the hospital for almost a month when they did the surgery to remove it. I've mentioned this before, Sydney knows. It was the size of an orange, large orange, that was in the left side of my brain, and it had pretty much pushed everything over in my skull. I used to be a person that did 5K walks for charities. I did snowshoeing with my brother and my sister-in-law. I had done, a friend of mine challenged me to do rock climbing in a rock gym. I did those things. And after having the surgery, I had to teach myself how to walk, how to talk. It was a big challenge. But being on that group on Facebook of Hiking My Feelings, it was helping me find inner strength and find out kind of who I was. When I was up late one night, saw the post come across. I knew you were working on trying to get your book published and the struggles you were having with that. And I was getting ready to go to bed, and all of a sudden that popped up, and I clicked that link and I bought it because I knew that was going to be the next step that was going to help me figure out who I am and how I could help heal myself. And that's where we've gotten to today.
Yeah. And you've been like such a light in this community. Like, we're all just like your biggest fans, and we all have each other's back. And I love seeing how we've connected, like the group that was participating in Read and Reflect that like was able to show up for the calls and stuff because that time worked out or whatever, is like this core group of people that I'm just so excited to see that circle like expand. Like if this was a campfire, like we're all just kind of like making the circle bigger now, right? Like we've got a good core group of folks that we all have each other's back. Like this is definitely, I've always said this is bigger than my story. It's bigger than hiking. Like as we went around the country last year, we met people that walk their feelings, they climb their feelings, they fish their feelings, they read their feelings. Like the common theme has always been getting the devices out of our face and just like being out and with our emotions. And there's this group that's just like so fundamental to my mental health and my well-being. Like you guys, for as much as like, and I'm not asking these questions to like pump myself up because I know most of these answers. I'm trying to help other people who are watching understand what brings people here and why you guys stay. But it's just so beautiful to witness how organically this group has come together to the point where Read and Reflect was my sanity. Like that is a meeting every Sunday with you guys. Like that is what kept me going through the quarantine. That's what kept this organization alive, because when we had to cancel everything after COVID, like I showed up that Sunday and I was just full on ugly cry. I was like, I don't know what the path forward for this organization looks like. I don't know if I'm going to make it through this, like literally, mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever. So as a reflection back to you guys, everything that you've ever said that's ever been kind about me, the only reason that that's possible is because you guys show up in that same way. Like these traits that we all see in each other, we're all mirrors for each other. So as much everything that you love about this community, about me, about the other people in the community, you should love that about yourself too, because that's why you're seeing it the way you're seeing it. So at the very least, for the four of you, thank you for being here, and thank you for challenging me and asking me questions and showing up in the way that you have, because of how you guys show up and your commitment to your growth, more people will have the ability to be exposed to this work and do it with us, and like join us around this fire, and like be in our big group hugs and stuff like that. So thank you guys so much for being here. I know Pete, you had said something about what we were talking, you had sent me a message on Messenger about how the Hiking My Feelings Wilderness Wellness Center, each word has a thing, and like where we find ourselves. Let's talk about that, because what did you mean? And like, let's see where that goes, because I liked where you were going with that.
Yeah, well, I don't exactly know all the definitions for each word, but so like I actually wrote it down when I was thinking about it earlier. So like the Hiking My Feelings Wilderness Wellness Center, which I finally taught myself how to say. The hiking, yeah, exactly, right? Like hiking is the doorway into my feelings and taking ownership, and the feel like there's this process that comes through. And you and I were talking about communication with one another, and I was coming. And I find myself in this spot now where I have started letting go of the shore of what was safe and these patterns that I kind of grew up in and thinking, whatever. And so I'm leaving the shore and I'm discovering new things that really require an internal sense of permission to explore that on my own. And that, you know, I learned this from Brene Brown first, is like stepping into this wilderness. There are no maps except for maybe the 2 or 3 steps I can see ahead of me. There's no, you know, sometimes you and I have even spoken to each other. Travis, my partner, and I speak to each other, and it's like, we might as well be speaking French and German. Neither of us know either of those languages. And so the more I learn about myself, the harder it also becomes to communicate that to others sometimes, because the way I learn and the way I process things is different from everyone else around me. And like, we all seem to have our own ways to navigate ourselves. Again, from decolonizing to indigenizing, like that indigenizing, there's as many ways to do that as there are fingerprints. So I am currently struggling right now with navigating the wilderness. So that's a process for me that is brand new in my lifetime. I mean, it's probably safe to say I've navigated the wilderness before in smaller chunks, or less aware of it when I was doing it, or holding on to a teacher or a coach or a therapist in a way, in the training wheel sense. But fully trusting myself is scary as fuck. And you know, I do lean on people in this community and the people in my family, my inner circle, my found family. But anyway, so that's what we were getting into. So the wilderness, there's the wellness, there's the centering of ourselves, centering of community. Yeah, so it's interesting that these words came to you, or however you discovered these words and what they mean for the process of the journey to uncover, discover, remove these ideas that we were basically given at birth through unconsciousness, through whatever the birthing process is of forgetting where we came from. So that journey back to ourselves is also in the journey of the words and the journey of the process of that you have discovered, hiking my feelings. So I'm very excited, as frustrated as I can be with myself and with other people who don't automatically know what I mean when I discover something new about myself or a reflection about someone else around me. As frustrating as that can be, it's also super invigorating that I found a community that, even though I stub my toe or stub their toe with something that comes out of my mouth, there's this moment of, okay, we might need to take a moment, but we come back, we shed, we have grace, and then we get right back into that what are we trying to discover here? What are we trying to remove? What are we trying to build? So that, does that all make sense?
Yeah, I love it.
Okay.
And I feel like if Hiking My Feelings Wilderness Wellness Center are words that illustrate the journey, then I think day to day, I could be on all of them, right? Like, I don't think you get through, because hiking is the doorway, and I love that. Hiking is the doorway to discover my feelings. And I said hiking my feelings intentionally. Like, it's not, I'm not hiking your feelings. I'm not hiking Laura's feelings. I'm not hiking Ash's feelings. I'm hiking my feelings. And there's such a, there's like the societal understanding or social contract. I really like how Dr. Thema said that with the social contracts. Like, I'm fine. How are you? You're fine. Okay, great. Same thing with like, we are so good at avoiding feelings, right? And we're expert avoiders at feeling feelings. And we're really good at projecting because that's what's been demonstrated to us. Like, unless you grew up in a happy, healthy household where everybody's done the work and everybody's loaded with healthy coping mechanisms, which like, I've yet to meet one of those people. We're all still trying to figure this out for ourselves. And so hiking my feelings, like it's reclaiming the stuff that's mine. It's that trauma pack. We're like, okay, that's not mine. That's not mine. Okay, that's mine. I should set that aside. I need to work on that. But there's so much stuff in these backpacks that we carry that like reclaiming our stories, reclaiming our trauma, reclaiming the things that we want to heal. That's our responsibility. Like, I can't heal you. I can tell you what's worked for me. I can point you in the direction of resources. I can help illuminate some of the things that might be going on that you can't see because you're so married to the stories that you're telling yourself. But ultimately, like, everything we're about here is like that journey in, and like, how do we reclaim the things that are ours, and how do we start to process the things that aren't without harming other people in the process of doing that. And I am just so blessed and thankful that is like, that's one of our social contracts in this group. We all know that we're responsible for our own healing. We all know that when we communicate clearly, when even when you stumble, clear communications, I'm never going to fault anybody for that. Like, the words might be messed up. You might like say something out of context or something, like, or I might not have all the information, and then I have to deal with my own stuff that comes up as a result of that. But at the end of the day, if the communications are clear, if the intent is good, and we're responsible for the impact we make with our words, with this process, then we can't really go wrong. And that's why, like, I chose the word family for the group. One, because it's gender neutral. So there's no like, hey ladies, hey guys, like, everybody's welcome here. You're part of the family. It indicates the vibe that we're setting, which is warm, open communication, the kind of family I would want to have, because at this point, everybody that's in my life is my chosen family. My actual blood family isn't really present for any of this, which is a damn shame. But it's also, this is the kind of care that I want all of us to feel for each other. It's like, if you have not had that kind of relationship where you just know that you can just come dump without judgment, I want you to know that you can do that here. If you've never had a place where you can show up and be frustrated and talk about the hard shit you've survived, I want you to know that you can do that here. So I love this like context of how each one of these words means something else. And like, I wake up, most of the time I wake up in the wilderness and I'm like, what do we do? How, like, especially these last couple of weeks, we're like, well, this is all new. This forest is scary, right? Like, we haven't seen this stuff before. Some of the forest is burning down around us. Some of the forest is getting torn down. But what is the like most impactful part of the way that you framed this is like, it's okay to be at any stage, right? Like, you don't have, like, this is not you don't need to like get to the destination of center. Like, center is not the goal. Like, it's a part of the experience, and like the awareness of that. I was saying this, like, I feel like I was on loop, like I was a disc that was like repeating itself, but like, the awareness is the work, and drowning ourselves in compassion is the way that we get through the work, because there's so many things that tell us that we're not allowed to show up this way, or we're not allowed to be our true self. And so I really like, thank you for putting the name of the place that we're building, the physical structure, in this kind of context, because that lends itself to programming that lends itself to the energy that we're putting into this place, the energy of this community. So I just like, when you said that initially in the chat, I was like, let's see where that goes. But with your explanation of it, I'm like, I'm kind of really obsessed with this, Pete. Like, I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
So what, for Ash or Becca or Laura, what are some of the things that you've been able to take away from your experience here that is applied to your life outside of like literally being on the trail? Like, are there lessons that you've taken away from being in this community, from doing this work, from reading the book, from showing up to these campfires, whatever it is, where that can be applied to something outside of your literal outdoor adventures?
Yeah. So I have another story.
I love stories. We're at a fire. That's the whole deal.
The last time I hiked or maybe not the last time, but some other time that I hiked the trail that I hiked today, it was a day after, basically I had a depressive episode. I don't even remember really what caused it. But I just had like a really depressed, wallowy day. I had fallen into some old patterns that sorry,
It's a good
my
boy.
dogs bark at everything. I had fallen into some old patterns that I thought that I had learned don't serve me, right? And I just sort of, and when I get depressed, my avoidant behavior is to like basically lie on the couch and get lost in some terrible TV show, which I know is not good for me. It's terrible for me. And it's hard for it. It has at times been hard for me to find that balance between stillness and rest, and not letting it turn into something that's frankly dangerous for me. And so anyway, I just was I gave myself some grace. So thanks, Pete. That's an important part of the process. It was a stumble and it was a fall. And then the next day I got up and I went for a great hike. And on that hike, I literally fell, like, on my knees. And, I fall a lot when I hike, which is just part of the process. I fall a lot when I life too.
I like that. I fall when I life. Same, girl.
So it was just really funny. And I was able to draw this comparison because I didn't hurt myself on that fall. I just sort of got up and I looked around and made sure there was nothing too embarrassing, or nobody saw it, which wouldn't have been a big deal if they had. And I was fine. And I just kept going. And, I really saw the comparison between the slip into an old pattern and the slip, on the gravel. And that both of them deserve compassion.
I love that. Oh, that's good. Yes. Miss Ash, you got one? You look like you do.
I do. So last Friday, I had a really, really good call with a potential business mentor. And I think 2 years ago, I would have come up with a million excuses to get myself out of that situation. A million excuses, a million reasons to why I didn't deserve to be in that position. A million reasons why it would I would self-implode on myself. I would become the self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think the first time that I asked myself, but what if it works? But what if something good comes of this, was before I went to my first talk. I'm a really, really socially anxious person. And admittedly, it's really boned me out of a lot of opportunities that have more or less been placed in my hand, and I've just swatted them away. And it's kept me away from amazing people who could have taught me amazing things about myself and who could have taught me a lot of lessons. but so I think like it was me, me working through my own social anxiety, but also me doing the work and putting myself and for all the subsequent events that I went to, for all the hikes that I went to after that, for me, going to the Rager Ranch, and everything after that was, what if it works? What if this ends up being some fantastic, amazing healing experience, and it always ends up working out well, and that, you know, directly transfers, you know, into real life, and having this fantastic one-to-one chat with a mentor who said after the fact, I learned just as much from you from this call as you did from me. So yeah, I mean, thank you for humbling me and keeping me accountable, and you know, holding my feet to the campfire to keep me to show up.
Yeah, I'm glad you do. And you show up in powerful ways. So don't ever let anybody tell you that you don't, because everybody here does for sure. Laura, do you have any lessons, or do you want to kick off the group gratitude circle? It's up to you. Well, you could do both.
I'll do a quick one. One of the things that had happened this past year was there was a lot of surgery in our family in 2019. My sister-in-law, a month before we found my brain tumor, got thrown off of a horse, and she shattered her right arm. And she's the one that had let me know that you were going to be there in April and had directed me towards you. So I'm thankful to her for that. But she also bruised her ribs and displaced a couple of discs in her back. And then I had my surgery for my brain tumor. My brother had 2 knee surgeries, and one of my aunts had a knee surgery, and one of my cousins shattered her clavicle. And the cousin that shattered her clavicle at that time told me, you know, you are the strongest woman that I have ever met in my life, Laura, with everything that you've gone through. And that was at a time when, before your book came out, and I was like, I'm not that strong. How can she say that I'm that strong? And I guess she made, thinking about what she had said and everything that I was learning from you in your book, it made me realize, yeah, maybe I am stronger than what I ever gave myself credit for. And I am still on that path to find that in my soul and inside of me. But I've got good mentors to help me with that. I've got Jess, I've got Vicky, I've got you, I've got Michelle. Every single person in this group has given me good words to go and continue to find my way. And
I love
that leads me into my gratitude of having all of you as inspiration.
I love that. And if there's anybody in the Zoom chat that wants to pop on and share what they're grateful for, go ahead and turn on your video and I'll call on you, Brady Bunch round robin style. But Ash, what are you grateful for?
I'm grateful for everybody in this circle today. I'm grateful for everybody who's showing up and showing the vulnerability that they did. Vulnerability, I think, is really a superpower, and it's really not easy to get to that place. It takes a lot of work, but it also takes a village to raise a child. And I think that the only way that you can really kind of access that skill and that superpower is by asking that village to support you and to help bring it out of you.
I love that. Pete. Yeah. Pete, what are you thankful for?
I'm grateful for trust. Getting to witness this group of people trust themselves, and also me come on here and trust myself to share a piece of me that's very vulnerable, that has been shut down and denied in the past. So to be able to practice a different way to show up in the world that is powerful, I'm grateful for the opportunity and for the community to practice that.
I love that. Becca, what are you thankful for?
I mean, the same. I'm really thankful for this group and for you, Sydney. I'm so glad that the universe brought us together however many lifetimes ago.
Yeah.
And and I think the only thing that I'll add is I'm grateful to myself, for showing up even when it was hard, and for doing the work, and like Pete said, for trusting myself. And it's, the work is never done. I don't think that there's a point at which you just arrive and say, I'm healed. But like, I've done enough of the work to have gotten to the point that I really can say that I love myself, and it's not even that hard to say anymore. And nobody can ever take that away from me, not even me.
Yeah. Yes. Oh God, I love that last part. Not even you. Oh, that's so good. I love you. Thank you. Michelle, what are you thankful for?
I'm thankful that I'm finally starting to connect the dots as to what's going on with me. Like I mentioned before, I buried a lot of things in order to become numb to it, and I thought I was healed when I wasn't. And now that I'm being more vocal about it, I'm thankful and grateful that I'm finally starting to understand everything that's going on in my head and everything that I've done and how to work on getting better. So that's what I'm thankful for.
I love that. Thank you. Vicky, how about you, my dear?
So I have to give a tiny bit of background here. Every year on the first full weekend of June, which is this weekend, the Crazy Horse Monument up outside of Custer, South Dakota, opens up for people to hike up to the face. It's a 10K hike, and my sister and I have done it together every year for the past 15 years. Today, it would have been today. It was canceled this year for COVID, because of COVID. It's a big group hike. I should have been getting another one of these today.
Dang.
But obviously it didn't happen. But here's the thing, and it actually only just occurred to me during tonight's campfire, how much that hike, even before I thought about hiking my feelings or stepping into the healing power of nature, or any of those sorts of things, every year going on that hike did something for me. I mean, I remember it got me through. I remember between my first year of law school, when I was this close to quitting, and I went on that hike, and there's a sign there that says never forget your dreams, and how important it has been. And I've been a little unsteady the last couple weeks, and I think it's at least in part because back here I was like, shit, I'm missing my hike. I'm missing not just a hike. I mean, I've been going on hikes, but I'm missing Crazy Horse. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but what I'm gonna do is be grateful that Crazy Horse exists, for a whole lot of reasons. And if you've never been there, please go. It's a beautiful museum. It's a super, super cool monument in progress for over 60 years, and it probably won't be completed in my lifetime, but that's part of the beauty of it. So I am grateful today for the Crazy Horse Monument outside of Custer, South Dakota. Thank you.
I love that. Jason, my man, what are you grateful for? Nice to see your face.
Hey, I know. Again, so I wanted to tell everybody, I mean, I've been following the virtual campfires pretty much since episode 1. And thank you again for having me your guest on Tuesday. But I wanted to say I'm grateful for everyone here that shares their story. even if it's just a little snippet on I'm grateful, or it's just a little, I want to share this, I want to share that. So let me tell, I'm grateful for that, but I wanted to let all of you know to invite your friends and family, the people that matter to you, to watch the recordings of the YouTube streams, because ever since Tuesday, I've actually had a handful of friends that I did not realize were going to watch. They didn't necessarily watch as it was streamed, but they had actually just kind of fast forward to see some of the things I had to say. I even had a coworker that I had kind of chatted with after the fact, that actually watched the recording. And the stuff that you say and share, people hear you, and it affects them. I had people reach out to me saying, wow, I didn't realize, you went through this. I didn't realize you went through that. But I wanted to let you all know that I'm grateful for your energy, because as much as I know a lot of you are experiencing your own personal traumas, the fact that you are open enough to say I'm battling this, it just reverberates this amazing energy. And even though I know it's easy to feel helpless, you are in fact helping others by just admitting that you're struggling. So I wanted to say I'm grateful to all of you. And
Thank you.
yeah. So thank you.
I love it. That's so cool to hear too. And that's so important, right? Like, cause we all, and Michelle had mentioned this earlier. She's like, I'm showing up, I'm talking about things that I've never talked about, and it's on YouTube. Like, legit, like, this is some powerful stuff, guys. Like, what you're creating is so important, and if nothing else, gives the people in your life an insight into who you are and how you tick, and might give them context for interactions you've had, or how you show up, or anything like that. So it's all good stuff. Thank you for calling that out, Jason, because I agree with that 100%. Mary, what are you thankful for?
So tonight, what's coming to mind is gratitude for just new language. I think I've maybe said this before, but especially tonight, one of the ones that really stuck out to me was sacred pause. That phrase, pausing for me was always very scary and felt selfish too. So I'm going to rephrase those pauses and really treat them as sacred. I'm in the middle of a big one right now. So whether it's a big one or just little pauses throughout the day, and treating them as sacred and not being so scared of them and not feeling like it's selfish. So I'm grateful for that new language tonight.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, that one too. I was like, oh, that's like, yes, like I feel it here. Jess, what are you thankful for?
So I'm thankful today that I don't have to be perfect. There's been a lot of modeling of, to speak on vulnerability, the same idea. There's been a lot of modeling on vulnerability as power, and a lot of people that are just absolutely being themselves. I mean, I sort of learned growing up and through interactions with other people that, or maybe it was just my armor, I don't know, but I needed to be perfect. I needed to be the leader. I needed to be the always smiling, the encourager, the, this, that, the other thing. And there's so much more power I'm finding. And I don't like saying there's so much more power. I mean, like, wow, I can just be like, wow, I'm kind of hurt and things hurt me and things affect me and things piss me off. And I want to change things about myself and about the world, and people like connect and vibe with that reality a lot more than they connect and vibe with the perfectionism I've been putting on myself. So I'm really grateful for the space to be able to just be flawed, be a work in progress, be an unfurling. And it helps because I'm really freaking impatient. So I am really thankful for everyone else just showing that it's okay to be patient with yourself too.
I love that. That's great. I think that's everybody because the screen got rearranged. Did everybody get to go? I think so. Okay. Well, I was gonna have us all sing happy birthday to Pete because it's Pete's birthday, but I think Pete jumped off or got disconnected. So, Pete, if you're watching the replay, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Pete. Happy birthday to you. Yay! So,
Happy birthday, Pete!
yeah. So for everybody that is on YouTube, tomorrow we have Amy Laseski, who is the owner and operator and genius and wonderful woman behind Finest City Improv, which is where I studied improv and where my speaking career got its start. And we also have my friend Michelle, who's coming. And the prompt for tomorrow, or the mantra for tomorrow, is I make time to reflect on my life. And as you go to sleep tonight, night, I want you to think about your life and reflect on it. And what have you loved? What would you change if you could do it over? If there's anything like that, and bring that tomorrow. And let's talk about tomorrow on our gratitude circle. What are the things that we're thankful for that we've been through that have shaped us? So that's your parting words for tonight, your homework for the evening. And if you are on YouTube, we'll see you tomorrow. We go live at 5 p.m. Pacific. And if you're in the Zoom chat, stick around for the post show. Thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Peace.